Sparta was one of the most efficient and strongest of the Greek city-states in its time. It dominated its enemies with an elite army. The Spartans were highly organised and their land-based army was almost untouchable, both in its battle skills and its mastery of warfare tactics and fighting. In today's culture, the word Spartan is associated with an exceptional warrior, built and bred for battle. So here are 5 interesting things about these ancient Greek warriors. Spartans had to prove their fitness even as infants. Spartan selection started from day 1. Infanticide was a disturbingly common act in the ancient world, but in Sparta this practice was organised and managed by the state. All Spartan infants were brought before a council of inspectors and examined for physical defects, and those who weren't up to the standards were left to die. It was believed by historians that the supposedly ill-born babies were tossed into a chasm at the foot of Mount Tacitus, but this has been dismissed as a myth, although the real procedure would have been just as barbaric. If a Spartan baby was judged to be unfit for his future duty as a soldier, it would most likely be abandoned on a nearby hillside. Left alone, the child would either die of exposure or be rescued and adopted by strangers. Babies who passed inspection still didn't have it easy. To test their constitutions, Spartan infants were often bathed in wine instead of water. They were also frequently ignored when they cried and commanded never to fear darkness or solitude. According to Plutarch, these tough-love parenting techniques were so admired by foreigners that Spartan women were widely sought after for their skills as nurses and nannies. Spartan children were placed in a military-style educational program called Agoge. The Spartan warrior training began at age 7. Spartan boys were removed from their parents' homes and began the Agoge, a state-sponsored training regime designed to mould them into skilled warriors and moral citizens. Separated from their families and housed in communal barracks, the young soldiers were instructed in socialistic, warfare, stealth, hunting and athletics. At age 12 they were deprived of all clothing apart from a red cloak and forced to sleep outside and make their own beds from reeds. To ready them for a life in the field, the boy soldiers were also encouraged to scavenge and even steal their food, though if detected they were punished with brutal floggings. That certainly wasn't the only use of floggings, as trainee Spartans would often be lined up and individually whipped. The last boy standing would be the most highly honoured. Once these upcoming soldiers reached the age of 12, the Agoge obliged Spartan boys were individually handed over to a male mentor, usually an unmarried young man. This man was expected to function as a kind of substitute father and role model to his junior partner. Although this could be debunked as one of the many myths, it is said that they had sexual relationships with their male mentors. At the age of 18, Spartan boys became reserve members of the Spartan army. On leaving the Agoge, they would be sorted into groups, whereupon some were sent into the countryside with only a knife and forced to survive on their skills and training. This was called Cryptia, and the immediate objective of it was to seek out and kill any helots as part of the larger program of terrorizing and intimidating the helot population. Just as all Spartan men were expected to be fighters, all women were expected to bear children. Spartan girls were allowed to remain with their parents, but they were also subjected to a rigorous educational and training program. While the boys were readied for a life on campaign, girls practiced dance, gymnastics, javelin and discus throwing, which were thought to make them physically strong for motherhood. In this respect, classical Sparta was unique in ancient Greece, as in no other city-state did women receive any kind of formal education. Spartan men were not allowed to live with their wives until age 30. Spartan society didn't discourage romantic love, but marriage and childbearing were both subject to some peculiar cultural and governmental constraints. The state concealed that men should only marry at age 30 and women at age 20. Since all men were required to live in a military barracks until 30, couples who married earlier were forced to live separately until the husband completed his active duty military service. The Spartans saw marriage primarily as a means for conceiving new soldiers, and citizens were encouraged to consider the health and fitness of their mate before tying the knot. In fact, husbands who were unable to have children were expected to seek out viral substitutes to impregnate their wives. Likewise, bachelors were seen as neglecting their duty, and were often publicly mocked and humiliated at religious festivals. The Spartan Commitment. All Spartan men were expected to be lifelong soldiers. As grueling as Sparta's martial educational system could be, the soldier's life was the only option for young men who wished to become equal citizens, or homoioi. According to the edicts of the Spartan lawmaker and reformer Lycurgus, male citizens were legally prevented from choosing any other occupation other than the military. This commitment could last for decades, as warriors were required to remain on reserve duty until the age of 60. Because of their preoccupation with the study of warfare, Sparta's manufacturing and agriculture were left entirely to the lower classes. Skilled labourers, traders and craftsmen were part of perioeci, a class of free non-citizens who lived in the surrounding region of Sparta. Meanwhile, agriculture and food production fell to the enslaved helots, a servile class that made up the majority of Sparta's population. Ironically, constant fear of helot revolts and uprising was a major reason why the Spartan elite became so devoted to building a strong military in the first place. Surrender in battle was the ultimate disgrace. Spartan soldiers were expected to fight without fear and to the last man. Surrender was viewed as the ultimate cowardness, and warriors who voluntarily laid down their arms were so ashamed that they often resorted to suicide. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, 2 Spartan soldiers who missed out on the famous Battle of Thermopylae returned to their homeland disgraced. One later hanged himself and the other was only redeemed after he died fighting in a later engagement. Even Spartan mothers were known for their do-or-die approach to military campaigns. Spartan women are said to have sent their sons off to war with the chilling reminder, return with your shield or on it. If a Spartan troop died in battle, he was viewed as having completed his duty as a citizen. In fact, the law mandated that only 2 classes of people could have their names inscribed on their tombstones: women who died in childbirth and Spartans who fell in combat. So that's 5 facts about the Spartans, starting from birth up until their deaths. I hope you've enjoyed the video and thanks for watching.